Mr. and Mrs. Macshian, after the funeral, took their departure to Dunkeld Castle, on a visit to the old lord, and after installing Minnie Pelch as mistress of the house in Delphson Square, Eustace went down to Castle Grim, in order to tell Lady Errington about the will. It was a terribly bitter situation altogether. Husband parted from wife by a miserable misunderstanding, and this man, wealthy and clever, wavering between honor and dishonor, between respect for Guy and love for Alison. Chapter 34. The Assaults of the Evil One. I sit beside the gate of the heart. That bars the soul of this woman from me. The little white soul, that dwelleth apart, safe from temptation and evil dart. Nor one chink in the gate can I see. Would I could open this gate of the heart, enter within as a conqueror wild. Nay, but I see a sentinel start, to guard its treasure from earthly smart. Evil shrinks from this little white child. It was summer down at Denfield, and the noble woods around Errington Hall were waving their heavily foliaged branches over the flower-pranked earth. The wayside hedges were gay with blossoms, the swallows wheeled aloft in the bright blue sky, the farmer looking over the green fields was calculating the promise of harvest, and there was sunshine throughout the land. Sunshine from dawn till eve over the teeming earth. Sunshine in the hearts of village maidens, thinking of plighted troths. Sunshine in the stolid faces of farming lads, tramping beside their sleek horses. Sunshine among the cronies, seated outside the alehouse, in the warm summer air, but in the heart of Alison Errington there was no sunshine there. She was walking slowly up and down the terrace of the hall, dividing her attention between her own sad thoughts, and the gambols of Sammy, who was rolling amid his toys on an outspread bearskin. Straight and slender as an arrow, in her clinging white dress, with a red cluster of summer roses at her throat, but in her face a stern look, which melted into an adoring smile when she looked upon the child. Since her husband's departure, Lady Errington had not been happy. Perhaps she had been too hasty in judging him, perhaps she might have won him back from his evil ways by kindly words. But there, it was no use regretting the past. He was an exile on the continent, and she was alone in her beautiful home. Not quite alone, however, for the child was there, her darling child, who was the joy of her life, the light of her eyes, and the comfort of her heart. Still, she missed her husband, in spite of her self-congratulations that she had acted as she had done. She missed his kindly ways, his affectionate smile, his thousand little acts of tenderness, which had passed unnoticed when done, but now seemed to start out of the past like a reproach for her severity. Had she been too severe after all? He had sinned, it was true. She felt sure that his character, like that of all men, resembled that of her father, and yet had indignantly denied his fault. He had pleaded for one kind look, one parting word, and she had refused his prayer. If his heart was evil, would it not have been better for her to have striven to draw it closer to her by that one strand of affection than sever the strand altogether, and let it sink back into the gulf of iniquity from which it strove to emerge? Alison Errington was a good woman, who tried to do her best according to her lights, to whom the very thought of vice was utterly abhorrent, yet sometimes, as at this moment, unpleasant accusations of Pharisaism and self-righteousness were in her mind. All the tenderness and dog-like fidelity of her husband had failed to touch her heart, but now that he had, as she verily believed, slighted her willfully, and voluntarily left a life of purity for one of guilt, she felt that he was more to her than anyone else in the world, save his child. If his heart, if his instincts were as evil as she believed, all the more credit to him for the way in which he strove to act honestly, but if on the other hand she had misjudged him and driven a good man into evil by cruel words and harsh looks, then indeed she was to blame. Either way she looked at things now, it seemed to her that she was in the wrong, and yet she could not, would not, acknowledge that she had not acted justly. If he had only waited for a time, she told herself restlessly. If he had only shown by his actions that he desired to do right, I would have believed him in time. But to go back to that vile woman after what I said, no, he is like all the rest, makes evil his god, and would break my heart, and ruin his child's future, sooner than deny himself the gratification of his brutal instincts. Strong words certainly, But then she felt strongly. She was not a broad-minded woman, for the horror with which her father had inspired her had narrowed down her views of life to puritanical exactness. She demanded from the world purity, absolute purity, which was an impossibility. What man could come to a woman and say, "I am as pure in my life as you are"? Not one. Why then did she demand it from her husband? But this was quite another view of the question. Her thoughts had gone from one thing to another, until they had become involved and complex. With a weary sigh she shook her head, as though to drive away all those ideas, and sat down in a low chair, in order to play with the boy. "Sammy, Sammy, you mustn't put pretty things in Mouse Mouse." "Mum, Mum," from Sammy, who was making a bold attempt to swallow his coral necklace. Finding this a failure, he crawled quickly across the bearskin, drew himself up to his mother's knees, and stood grinning, in a self-congratulatory manner, on his unsteady little legs. "Come then," said Elizan, holding out her arms. Frantic attempts on the part of Sammy to crawl up on her lap, ending with a fall, and then a quick catching up into the desired place under a shower of kisses. They made a pretty picture, mother and son. The pale, sad-looking woman with the fresh, rosy boy, and Eustace paused a moment at the end of the terrace to admire it. The boy had caught the tortoiseshell pin in his mother's hair with one chubby hand, and before she could laughingly prevent him, had pulled it out, so that the fair ringlets came falling over her breast in a golden shower. "Oh, naughty Sammy," she said, gaily tossing him in the air with her two hands. "Look at poor mother's hairbed child." Sammy, however, appeared to have a different opinion, and chuckled indistinctly to himself, until he caught sight of Eustace, of whom he was very fond, and stretched out his arms with a merry crow. "Mr. Gartney," said Lady Errington, flushing a rosy red at the disorder of her hair, "just see what this scamp has done." "Young Turk," said Eustace, taking the boy with a smile, while Elizan hastily twisted up her hair into a loose knot. "How are you today, Lady Errington?" "Quite well, thank you," she replied quietly, as he sat down near her with Sammy still on his knee. "I thought you were up in town." "So I was. Came down last night," answered Gartney, while the baby made futile grabs at his watch chain. "Well, my prince, and how are you?" "He's never ill," said the young mother with great pride. "I never saw such a healthy child. Not an illness since his birth." "Lucky Sammy. If his future life is only as pleasant as the first year of it, what a delightful time he will have." Lady Errington's face had grown very grave during this speech, as she had caught sight of the crepe on his arm, and suddenly remembered why he had gone up to town. "You went to the funeral?" she asked, the color flushing in her face. "Yes," he replied, smoothing the child's fair curls with gentle hand. "I went to the funeral. Poor Aunt Jelly, I do not think she was sorry to die." Elizan made no reply, but sat perfectly still, looking steadily at him with a questioning look on her face. He knew what she so much desired to know, and broke the bad news to her as gently as he was able. "I heard the will read," he said awkwardly, reddening a little through the bronze of his complexion, "and she has left all her property to me." "To you?" "Believe me, I neither expected nor desired it," he cried hastily. "I have got plenty of money, without wishing more, and I thought she was going to leave it to Guy. I really thought she intended to do so." "My poor child." That was all she said, not a thought, not a word of pity for her absent husband. All her sorrow was for the unconscious child playing on Gartney's knee. "I assure you," began Eustace, feeling like a robber, "that you could not help it," she answered quietly. "I know that perfectly well. Who can be accountable for such things? But I am thinking of the future of my son. This property is deeply mortgaged, and most of the income goes to pay the interest. If Guy lived with me here we might save during the boy's minority, but he is far away spending the money that is to be his son's. I thought Aunt Jelly would have left the boy something if she did not the father, and now he will be a pauper when he comes of age. This place will have to be sold, and my poor lad will never be Errington of the Hollow, poor soul, poor soul." Her voice ended in a tragic wail, and it was with difficulty that she restrained her tears. Eustace never felt so awkward in his life, as he did not know what to say in excuse for having unwittingly thwarted her hopes. Sammy had clambered down off his knee and was now contentedly covering his toys with his mother's handkerchief, while she, poor woman, was sitting looking at him silently, with an expression of mute misery on her face. "Lady Errington," said Eustace earnestly after a pause, "believe me, I am as sorry as you are, but I do not know how to act. I wrote to Guy, offering him half the property by deed of gift, and he refused to take it." "He could do no less," she answered dully. "What right have we to rob you?" "It's not robbery," he replied vehemently. "I have more money than I want. Whenever Guy likes to accept, he shall have half the property." Without answering his question, she looked down at the baby playing at her feet and then glanced at him keenly. "Where is my husband?" she asked quickly. "On the continent at San Remo." With that woman." I do not know," replied Eustace in a low voice, turning his face away. "Mr. Gartney." "Yes, Lady Errington." "Look me in the face." He did so unwillingly, and found her eyes fastened on his with a determined expression. "Is my husband with that woman?" "No, I do not think so, but I certainly heard she was at San Remo," he answered evasively. "Ah," she drew a long breath and a look of anger swept across her pale face. "He is with her then, I thought so." "You must not be too hard on Guy," said Eustace, very feebly it must be confessed. "Hard on Guy," she repeated scornfully. "Hard on a man who leaves his wife and child for a vile woman like that. You of course take his side." "Why should I?" demanded Eustace hotly. "Because I am his cousin." "No, because you are a man. Men always stand up for one another. It's a kind of esprit du corps with them, I suppose. It is no wrong to betray a woman in their eyes." "I do not know why you expect me to stand up for my sex, I am sure," said Eustace cynically. "I think very little of them, I assure you, and am quite incompetent to undertake the Herculean task of defending their failings. I have got too many of my own to account for." "I have no doubt," replied Lady Errington bitterly. "You men are all the same." "I sincerely hope not," retorted Eustace imperturbably. "I have no desire to resemble certain fools of my acquaintance. My character is no better nor no worse than my fellow creatures, and had some good woman like yourself taken charge of my life, I might have improved." "You ought to get married." "Do you think so from your own experience?" She flushed crimson, and in order to hide her confusion stooped down to pick up the child. "Marriages are made in heaven," she said, trying to pass the thing off lightly. "I understand there's a tradition to that effect," responded Eustace, indolently. "If that is the case, it is a pity heaven gives a woman to one man who does not care about her, instead of bestowing her on another who cannot be happy without her." "Is that your case?" "Yes." There was a pause, during which she looked at him curiously. He met her gaze calmly, and not an idea of his meaning crossed her mind. "So you love a married woman?" "I do, and therefore no doubt am an object of horror in your eyes." The child had fallen asleep on her breast, and rising to her feet she walked slowly to and fro, rocking him in her arms. "I have no right to judge you," she said evasively, "but you can hardly expect me wife and a mother to say that I approve of such a dishonorable passion." Eustace winced at the scorn of the last words. "No, I cannot," he answered slowly, "but let me put the case before you in another way. Suppose a woman is married to a man who cares absolutely nothing about her, neglects her in every way, insults her by his passion for another woman." "Oh," she cried, shrinking as if he had struck her a blow. "I am putting a supposititious case, remember," he said hastily. "Well, this woman has a lover who adores her, but who has never ventured to express this passion, which the world calls dishonorable. The woman returns that passion and has only to say one word to the lover in order to be released from the curse of a loveless marriage, a neglectful husband, an unhappy home. What should that woman do in such a case?" Remain true to her marriage vows, she said grandly. But if the husband is not true, is she to sink to the level of the husband? No, Mr. Gartney. Let the wife shame the husband by her fidelity to the vows which he has broken. And the lover's is not a true lover, or he would not wish to drag the woman he professes to love through the mud of the world. So you would condemn 2 lives to perpetual misery for the sake of one man, who does not appreciate the sacrifice. Not for the sake of the one man, but for the sake of virtue, of honor, of uprightness. Eustace was silent under the cold purity of her look. This woman was no dreamer as he had thought, but had a soul like that Roman Lucrece, who preferred death to dishonor. Your creed is severe, he said at last, with a frown on his strongly marked features. My creed is right, she replied simply. Yes, according to the world. No, according to God. As a rule, Gartney was not to be daunted by any woman, but there was something about Alison Errington that made him afraid to talk in his usual cynical vein. Standing a short distance away, with the child in her arms and the golden glory of the sunshine behind her, this young mother looked like the realization of the Madonna. So pure, so calm, so lovely, with the look of motherhood in her eyes that he involuntarily turned away his head, as though he was not worthy to profane such purity even by a glance. You talk above my head, he said at length, rising to his feet. It is the language of an ideal world, not to be realized in this matter-of-fact century. But if you will forgive me, Lady Errington. Why not call me Alison, she said cordially. We are cousins, you know, and titles are so formal, Eustace. It's very kind of you to grant me such permission, replied Gartney frankly, taking the hand she held out to him. Goodbye, Alison. Not goodbye, but au revoir. May I come over again? He asked eagerly. Of course. I am always glad to see you. Besides, Sammy loves his kind friend who plays with him. And you? Their eyes met, a wave of crimson passed over her face, and with an air of displeasure she turned away coldly, without answering his question. Goodbye, Mr. Gartney. Seeing that his freedom had offended her, he was too wise to make any further remark, but bowing slightly walked slowly away. At the end of the terrace he looked back, and saw she was bending over the sleeping child, crooning some cradle song to soothe his slumbers. The castle is well defended, he said bitterly, as he resumed his walk. I will never succeed in entering that heart, for the child stands ever as sentinel. He mounted his horse, and rode slowly down the avenue into the green arcade of trees, through the boughs of which came golden shafts of sunlight. A saint, he cried, touching his horse with the spur, and yet the saint drove her husband to evil. Chapter 35, For my child's sake. I will look my dear boy in the face. In after years. Without the shadow of disgrace. Or shameful tears. Oh, folly, did I sin with you? And cause him pain. If hands are clean, and hearts are true. His is the gain. Through future days of toil and fret. Come dull or fair. Dear God, ah, let him ne'er forget his mother's care. It was very dull down at Castle Grim, for even the bright sunshine of summer could not lift the shadow which seemed to lower over the place. Eustace amused himself as well as he could, strolling on the lonely beach, reading his books, playing his piano, and occasionally visiting at Errington Hall, which he did about 3 times a week. Alison was genuinely glad to see him, as in spite of her desire not to do so, she missed her husband more than she cared to say, and Gartney's bright, cheerful talk was a great pleasure to her. Besides, the child was fond of him, and that counted for a great deal in the eyes of the young mother, who was never tired of telling her complacent visitor about the pretty ways and infantile tricks of her treasure. As a rule, he rode over in the afternoon and stayed to dinner, after which he returned to Castle Grim in the shadows of the summer twilight. What long conversations they used to have on the terrace in the gloaming, talks about books, and the burning questions of the day, and travels in far distant lands. Eustace found his companion singularly charming from an intellectual point of view, as, during her lonely girlhood, she had read a great deal, and moreover, remembered what she had read. They never touched on the subject of their first conversation, however, as Alison entrenched herself within her reserve, and refused to be drawn into further argument in the matter. Under these circumstances, Eustace was unable to tell whether he had made any impression upon her, and was forced to play the part of an ordinary friend, a role not at all to his liking. After all, it was very questionable whether this platonism would change to a warmer feeling, as the cold demeanor of Alison entirely forbade, in a tacit manner, any overstepping of the limit of friendship. Eustace, owing to his inherent cynicism and peculiar mode of life, had not much belief in woman, but this time he was obliged to confess to himself that he had not entirely mastered the feminine sex. He loved her devout lithe actual woman, this time, for the pale, virginal vision which had haunted his brain during his travels in Arabia had entirely vanished, and in place of this unsatisfying dream, he adored the living, breathing woman herself. Doubtless he invested the reality with many of the attributes of the ideal, but at the same time, he found in Alison Arrington the first companion of the other sex, who satisfied his artistic eye and his intellectual desires. Could he have married her, he would have been perfectly happy, and forgotten the old, empty, aimless existence of the past. But as it was impossible, seeing she was the wife of another man, he could only stand outside the gates of the paradise he could never hope to enter, and envy the impossible. All idea that his passion was dishonorable had now vanished, and his dearest hope was that she should divorce her present husband, in order to become his wife. Although he did not understand the actual circumstances of the case, he was well aware that Alison considered herself outraged by her husband's companionship with Mrs. Veilsturm. He knew that Guy had shown a marked preference for the society of Cleopatra, and, as he had followed his charmer over to the continent, Eustace began to actually believe that Arrington was in love with the beautiful Creole. Small blame to him, thought Eustace to himself as he drove over to the hall one evening. She set her mind upon making a conquest of him, and when a woman does that, a man may as well give in to the inevitable with a good grace. At all events, it's not my fault. I never spoke to Mrs. Veilsturm in any way. I never told his wife about the affair, its fate, and nothing else, and seeing that he has forgotten all a husband's duties, they will never come together again, so I do not see why I should not profit by the occasion. In this way did Eustace pacify his conscience to his own satisfaction, although at times he had an uneasy feeling that a good deal of hard, bitter truth underlay all this sophistry. A good many weeks had gone by, and Lady Arrington had come to look upon him as a firm friend. Still, not being satisfied with this, and suffering all the tortures of a restless mind, he determined, as soon as possible, to find out if she was prepared to divorce her husband for his infidelity, and if so, thought he would plead his own cause. "If there's a chance for me, I will stay in England and try my hardest," he said to himself as he alighted from the dog-cart at the hall. "If not, I will go out to Africa with Laxton." Javerac drove the dog-cart off in the direction of the stables, and Eustace, after one look at the opaline evening sky, in which glimmered a pale star over the treetops, went inside, where Lady Arrington was expecting him to dinner. She was in the little Dutch room, which was her favorite, and when Eustace was announced by the servant, was standing by the table tossing Sammy in the air, while Tasker, well pleased, waited to bear off the young gentleman to bed. "See my treasure," she cried as Gartney approached her. "He has come to say good night. Excuse me shaking hands, Eustace." "Certainly, I yield to stronger claims," said Gartney, looking at the laughing child and at the happy young mother in her long, white dinner dress. "You ought to be in your nursery, you young scamp." "So he ought," laughed Lady Arrington, devouring the baby face with kisses, "but he cried for me so much that nurse had to bring him down." "He hollered, sir," confirmed Mrs. Tasker placidly. "I never did see sich a child for his mother. The sweetest, dearest treasure in the world," said Eliza, taking Sammy across to his nurse. Here, nurse, take himo. He's got my flowers, naughty boy. And indeed, Master Errington, crowing with delight, carried off a mangled geranium in triumph to his nursery, kicking vigorously in Mrs. Tasker's strong arms. How you idolize that child, Eliza, said Eustace enviously. He is all I have in the world, she replied with a sigh. I do not know what I should do without him. Do not inspire the angels with envy, murmured Gartney. A little cruelly, it might be dangerous for him. Oh! She laid her hand on her heart with a cry, and a pallor overspread her face. It is cruel to talk like that, she said hurriedly. You do not think he looks ill, do you? He's such a strong child, there's no chance of his dying. Oh, Eustace, you do not think that, do you? No, no, of course I do not, he replied soothingly. Do not get these foolish fancies into your head. Sammy will live to be a great trouble to you, I have no doubt. He will never be that, answered Lady Errington, recovering herself. Ah, there's the gong. Dinner is served, my lady, announced a servant at the door, and taking Gartney's arm, she went with him into the dining-room. It was Eliza and Eustace with them now, for after all, they were cousins, if only by marriage, and it was so disagreeable to constantly use the formality of titles. Still, there was always that indefinable barrier between them, which kept Eustace within the limits of kindly friendship, and on her part, Eliza never forgot her dignity as a married woman. It's very kind of you, Eliza, to take pity on a poor hermit, said Gartney, towards the end of the meal, but I do not know what the county will say at this tete-a-tete dinner. The county can hardly complain, seeing we are cousins. By marriage. Yes, by marriage, she assented, changing the conversation from such a distasteful subject, which reminded her of Guy. By the way, Eustace, I want you to sing to me this evening. I think I do that pretty nearly every time I come over, replied Eustace, smiling. Is there anything special you want? I remember your improvisation at Como about the fairy and the nightingale. It was very charming. Ah, you remember that, he cried, his face lighting up. It was too delightful to forget. Eustace laughed a trifle disbelievingly. Is that genuine, or a society romance? I always say what I mean, she answered with cold dignity. I am glad everybody else does not, retorted Gartney fervently. What a disagreeable world it would be, if that was the case. A very honest world, at all events. And therefore disagreeable too, are inseparable. Why should they be? Ah, why should not they, said Eustace meaningly. If the truth was pleasant, nobody would mind hearing it, but then the truth is not always pleasant. That is the fault of the person spoken of. I dare say, but he does not look at it in that philosophical light. You are as cynical as ever, she said with a sigh, as she arose to leave the table. The fault of the world, as I said before, he responded, opening the door. I would like to believe in my fellow creatures, only they will not let me. When she had vanished, he returned to his wine, and began to ponder over her words. He saw plainly enough that she did not care about him at all, but with ingrained vanity and egotism would not admit the coldness to himself. I will try what a song can do, he thought, as he followed her to the drawing-room. I can say in a song what I dare not say in plain words. Of course, Lady Errington had run up to the nursery to take a look at the baby, but shortly afterwards came down with an apology, to find Eustace seated at the piano. Outside was the luminous twilight of July, with a pale, starlit sky arched over the prim Dutch garden. The windows were open, and a warm breath of summer, heavy with the perfume of flowers, floated into the room. The somber trees stood black and dense against the clear sky. The garden was filled with wavering shadows, and a nightingale was singing deliciously in the heart of the still leaves, as the bats glided like ghosts through the air. Lady Errington established herself in a comfortable chair near the open window, with a white wrap as a protection against the falling dews. And Eustace, sitting at the Erard, in the bright light of the lamp, ran his fingers delicately over the keys. "What can I do against that immortal music?" he said absently, alluding to the nightingale. "Hark how the bursts come crowding through the trees. What passion and what pain! You do not know Matthew Arnold's poems, I suppose, Lady Errington." "Ah, you are wrong there," she replied quietly. "I am very fond of his melancholy verse." "Very melancholy," he answered musingly. "I agree with you there. I wonder if in the whole range of English literature there is a more bitterly true line than that famous one. We mortal millions live alone." "That is not my favorite," said Eliza dreamily. "I like that couplet. And bade betwixt their shores to be the unplumbed salt estranging sea." "It means very much the same thing," observed Eustace after a pause, "and it's in the same poem, I think. But how true it is. Lovers, friends, married or single, we all live alone, isolated by the estranging sea. No one really knows the heart of a fellow creature. But surely if a perfect harmony exists—" "There is always a something," said Gartney decisively, "like the perfume of a flower, the sigh of a wind, the throb of joy in the voice of a bird, that escapes us utterly. It is felt, but cannot be communicated. A sad idea. Very sad, but alas, very true." There was a silence between them for a few minutes, only broken by the song of the hidden bird and the ripple of notes from the piano, and then Eustace, with a deep sigh, shook off his somber thoughts and spoke cheerfully. "I must sing you something, Lady Errington," he said lightly. "All this conversation will make you melancholy." "I like to feel melancholy. It's suitable to the hour." "Then I must make my song the same," he observed gaily, and thereupon played a soft, dreamy prelude, at the end of which his sweet, sympathetic voice arose tenderly on the still air. "One, I love a star that shines above, when day is blending with the night. Alas, what pain this foolish love! Such worship brings but cold delight. I cannot scale the twilight sky, my love to tell in accents sweet. It comes not down although I sigh. And so my star I ne'er can meet. Too, O foolish heart, O cruel star, your love I dare not hope to gain. Yet still you shine each night afar, to mock my anguish and my pain. And yet thou art so sweet, so pure, I may not dare not thee forsake. For though this pain for I endure, I will love thee but my heart will break." "The story of an impossible love," said Lady Errington when he ended. "Yes, it is called My Star in Heaven. As if any man loved so hopelessly and purely absurd. There are more varieties of the human race than you know of, Alison." "No doubt, but I am not particularly impressed with those I have met with." "You are talking of me." "I am talking of my husband." Eustace left the piano and stepped outside into the beautiful still night. The moon was looking over the fantastic gables of the hall and filled the garden with trembling shadows. It was exquisitely beautiful, but human beings bring the prose of life into all the poetry of nature. Eustace did so now. "May I smoke a cigarette, Alison?" "Certainly." He lighted a cigarette and leaned against the wall of the house, watching the ghostly curls of smoke melting in the moonshine. Both were silent for a few minutes, occupied with their own thoughts, and then Eustace spoke. "Why do not you divorce your husband?" Lady Errington started violently, for strange to say, she was thinking of the same thing. She felt inclined to resent Gartney's plain speaking, but the light from the lamp was striking full on his grave face, and seeing how much in earnest he was, she changed her mind. "I shall never do that," she replied quietly, with a slight shiver. It might have been the night air or the idea of divorce, but she shivered as she spoke. "Why not? Can you ask? Think of the disgrace it would be to the child." It was all over. Eustace had an intuitive feeling that the last word had been said on the subject. She would never divorce her husband, she would never listen to his offers of affection, for the child was at once her safeguard and her idol. Had he been wise, he would have said nothing more. Not being wise, however, he 999. You have been very kind to me, Alison, he said slowly, very kind, and I shall treasure your kindness in my heart when I leave you. Where are you going? She asked in a startled tone. I am going to Africa. Have you any reason? The best of all possible reasons. I love you too well for my own peace of mind. Lady Errington arose, with a slight cry from her chair, and stood looking at him with wild eyes. Are you mad? I have been, he answered sadly, but I am mad no longer. She put out her hand to grasp the back of the chair and steady herself, still looking at him in amazement. She was not indignant, was not anger-red, was simply bewildered. I do not understand you, she said at length in a dull tone. What are you saying to me? What do you mean? I mean that I love you too well for my own peace of mind, he said steadily. Love me, the wife of another man. Will you sit down, Lady Errington? Observed Eustace in a measured tone. I will tell you all. I cannot listen. Such words from you are an insult. You will not say so when you hear what I have to tell. Alison sat down again in her chair, clasped her slender hands together. Then, looking steadily at his face, made a sign for him to go on, but otherwise gave no token of emotion. When I met you at Como, said Eustace, his usually slow enunciation quickened by a powerful emotion, I fell in love with you. Ah, you need not make that gesture of indignation. The passion was none of my seeking. The most virtuous woman could take no exception to such unrequited homage. I always was a strange man in my likes and dislikes, as you have no doubt heard. Never before had I met a woman I cared about. They tired me with their falseness and follies, but in you I saw for the first time an ideal which had been in my mind for many years. I dared not speak, as you were the wife of my cousin, and it would have been dishonorable, therefore I went away, and for many months strove to forget. Nature, however, was stronger than I was, and when I came back and saw you again, I found that I was more in love than ever. Still I said nothing, and kept out of your presence as much as I was able. Through the difference between yourself and Guy, I was unavoidably forced to see you often. What could I do? A man's passions are not always under his control. All women are not as pure and cold as you. I was afraid of myself, I was afraid of you, and in order to solve the difficulty, I did my best to bring you and Guy together. I spoke to Guy, but all was useless. He has gone back to Mrs. Veilsturm and forgets with her all his duties to you. I do not say he is right, but I say he is much to be pitied. Still, whatever my feelings may be towards him, the actual facts remain the same. He is with another woman, and you are left alone in the world. I foolishly dreamed that it might be my fate to release you from this unhappy position. I thought you might divorce the husband who has wronged you, but you refused to do so, for the sake of the child. Ah, that is the god of your idolatry. You care for nothing in the world save your child. It is the selfish passion of motherhood, pure, good, elevating, but still selfish. It is the child that came between you and your husband. It is the child who comes now between you and me. My love remains unaltered. It will always be the same, and had you been free, I might have spoken to you without dishonor. You refuse to loosen the bonds of your loveless marriage, and as I cannot be your lover or your husband, I dare not be your friend. Your husband is parted from you, will never return. I am going away on a perilous journey. I will never return. Therefore you will be alone with what you love best in the world, your child. With her clear eyes fixed steadily on his face, she heard him to the end of this long speech, without a quiver of the eyelids, without the trembling of her lip, and when he finished. So I am the married woman you said you loved? She asked coldly. Yes, and you say? I say now what I said then, she answered sternly. No man can be a true lover if he would wish to drag the woman he loves through the mud of the world. Eustace flushed deeply. You misunderstand me, he said hurriedly. I do not want to drag you down. I would not have spoken, only I thought a divorce. A divorce, she echoed, rising to her feet, and what is that but dishonor to me and to the child? Always the child, he said sullenly. And why not, the only pure thing in the world I have to love? My husband has deceived me. You have changed from a friend to a lover. I cannot listen to you without dishonor. What you said was perfectly true. Me love for the child is the selfish passion of motherhood. I pardon the words which you have spoken to me tonight, but we must never meet again. We will not, he muttered hoarsely. I leave England forever. Then we understand each other, and nothing now remains but to say goodbye. Have you no word of pity? I am sorry for your foolish passion, she said gently, but can I say more without lowering myself in your eyes? No, you are right. It is best for me to go. The star will never come down from heaven for me, but it will always shine there. He caught her hand and touched it with his hot lips. Goodbye, Elizon. God bless you, my dearest. Was it a fancy that a burning tear had fallen on her chill hand? She looked, and lo, her hand was wet. The door had closed. She was alone in the room, deserted both by husband and lover. Poor Eustace, she said softly, I am sorry for his madness. But if he is unhappy, I also am miserable. My husband and friend have both left me, but I have always my child. Chapter 36. The Death of the Firstborn. Dad's deed. His soul hath sped. The turf lies over his golden head. Cold, cold. In churchyard mould. In just one stroke hath the death bell tolled. Child, child. The angels smiled. Then carried thee heavenward undefiled. After the departure of Eustace, life went on in the same old fashion at the hall. Elizon passed her days and nights with Sammy, received the few visitors that called, and was as happy as she could be under the circumstances. She deeply regretted the kind friend who had been such a comfort to her in her loneliness, but looking back on what she had done, could not wish things otherwise. True, he had spoken most delicately, and in such a way as could offend no woman, still she was glad that he had gone, as his presence would have been a perpetual reminder to her of his unhappy passion. If I had married him, she thought sometimes, perhaps he would have made me a better husband than Guy. But no, his love was a mere passion of envy, wishing for what he could not obtain. Had I been single, very probably he would not have spoken to me as he 999. The fact that I am the wife of another man is the true reason of his desire that I should love him. Ah, these men, they are all the same. Eustace is a poet, and his pleading was more delicate than another man's would have been, but his instincts resemble those of the rest of his sex. Thus she talked to herself, trying to harden her heart against the misery of the man who loved her so devotedly and hopelessly. He was going away from England, to exile, perhaps to death, and all for her sake. Even the least vain of woman could not but feel a thrill of responsive feeling to such unutterable worship. But whenever she found herself thinking in this dangerous fashion, she tried to change the current of her thoughts. She was the wife of Guy Errington, and little as he deserved it, he had a right to expect entire purity of thought and deed in his wife. Yet, in spite of her puritanical nature, she dreamed at times of the unhappy exile whose love she had rejected. Guy never wrote to his wife, nor gave any sign of existence, and she, on her part, acted in the same way, so it seemed as if their lives were parted forever. Yet she frequently thought about him, and began to believe that she had been too harsh in her judgment. If such was the case, let him come back and ask her forgiveness. If he did so ill, she might pardon him, and then but no, there could never be any trust or affection between them. The phantom of the past would always come between them. So far as she could see, nothing remained to make her life happy but the child. Sammy was the idol of her heart. She forgot everything when she had him in her arms, and she felt that the whole world might go to ruin as long as this blue-eyed darling was left untouched, safe on the tender bosom of his mother. In her daily life, she adapted all things to suit the living of her child, and never knew a happy moment when she was away from his side. The first thing in the morning the child was brought down to her bedroom and sprawled on the coverlet, while she lay looking at him with happy eyes, babbling fond nonsense suited to his baby understanding. When he slept in the morning, she sat beside his crib watching the flushed little face, the tangled golden curls, and the tiny dimpled hands. She went out with him for his daily drive, accompanied by Mrs. Tasker, and would hardly let that worthy woman touch him, so jealous she was of his liking for anyone save herself. He played at her feet for hours, and she sat beside him in a low chair singing tender little songs, playing baby games, amusing him with his toys, and when he grew fretful with wakefulness, lulled him to sleep on her breast. Every hour of the day she found some new perfection in him. She was never tired of talking about his clever ways, his infantile wisdom, his loving disposition, and when he was laid to rest at night, she hung over him like an enamored lover breathing blessings on his unconscious head. The world will doubtless laugh at such tender devotion, at such intense absorption in an unformed infant, but no one but a woman, no one but a mother, can understand the wondrous power of maternal love that dominates every other feeling in the feminine heart. All the passion of lovers, the ecstasies of poets, the blind adoration of men for those they love, pale before this strongest of all feelings implanted in the human breast. Perhaps some will say that self-preservation is stronger, but this is not so, as a mother in an extreme case will sacrifice her life for that of her child, thereby proving the superiority of the maternal feeling. In this worship of the child she forgot earth, she forgot heaven, she forgot God. And God punished her. Sammy was cutting his teeth, and was feverish and fretful for some days, but although every care was lavished upon him, neither Alison nor Mrs. Tasker deemed the illness to be anything worse than a slight infantile malady. But one evening, Alison, bending over his sleeping form, saw his face grow black, his little limbs begin to twitch, and in a moment the poor child was in strong convulsions. Pale with terror, she shrieked for Mrs. Tasker and sent off a groom at once for the village doctor who had attended to Sammy since his birth. Mrs. Tasker, terribly anxious, yet restraining herself so as not to affright the agonized mother, did what she could under the circumstances and placed the child in a hot bath. The doctor arrived as quickly as possible, but he was too late. The child was dead. Dead! When the doctor told her, she could not believe it, and throwing herself on her knees beside the tiny corpse, tried in vain to see some sign of life. Alas, it was all in vain, and after an hour of agonizing dread, she was obliged to accept the inevitable. She did not lament, she did not weep, but only sat in dumb, tearless silence by the side of her dead child. One thing only she muttered, with ashen lips and restless hands plucking at her dress. "It is the judgment of God, because I loved his creature better than himself." There is no grief so terrible as that silent, self-concentrated agony which gives no sign. All through the lonely hours of the night she sat beside the crib, where all that she held dearest and best was lying stiff and cold, the tiny hands crossed on the breast, a smile on the placid little face. They tried in vain to persuade her to go to bed, to take some refreshment, to leave the room where the dead child lay, but all in vain, for rejecting all offers of consolation and kindness, she sat frozen with grief in the darkened room. The morning came, the time that she had been accustomed to hear the merry little voice and see the happy face, but the voice was silent now for evermore, and the face could that still, white mask be the face she had seen smiling in her own, the face that she had covered so often with kisses. She could not cry, although tears would have been a relief; she could not talk, although it would have eased her pain; she could only sit in a trance of speechless, thoughtless horror beside her dead. Mrs. Tasker, wise old woman that she was, knew that unless something was done, and that speedily, to rouse her mistress from this apathetic state, there would be danger of the mind becoming unhinged. So finding out Mr. Gartney's address in London, which she obtained by sending over to Castle Grim, sent a telegram and afterwards a letter to him urging him to bring the husband, the father, to the stricken mother. Eustace was leading an aimless life in town when he received the news and was terribly grieved about it. Without delay, he wired to Errington at San Remo, and then wrote to Victoria at Dunkeld Castle, asking her to come at once to the unhappy woman. Mrs. Macshian, much moved by the intelligence, came south without delay, in company with her husband, and went down to the hall. The sight of the young bride's kind face did more good to Lady Errington than anything else, and after all the apathy and horror of those dark days succeeding the death, the blessed tears came to relieve her overburdened heart. The two women wept in one another's arms, and hand in hand stood by the little coffin wherein lay the tiny body of the child. Otterburn kept out of their way as much as he could, feeling that his rough, masculine nature was but ill-suited to this house of mourning, but attended to all the details of the funeral pending the arrival of Errington. And Guy. Surely he would come over now that his child was dead, come over to bury his firstborn and console the afflicted mother. Eustace waited hopefully for a telegram saying that he was on his way, but at length received a wire asking him to come over to San Remo and see his cousin there. He crushed the telegram up in his hand with an oath. Good God, he said to himself in dismay, surely that woman cannot have besotted him so far that he cannot come to the funeral of his own child. He did not hesitate a moment, but wrote a letter to Otterburn at the hall, telling him he was going over to San Remo to bring back Errington, and then, hastily packing a few things, started from Victoria Station for the continent. During the last few weeks since his departure from Castle Grim, he had arranged all his affairs prior to his departure for Africa. Laxton was still in town as, Otterburn being married, he had not been able to find anyone to go with him as a companion, so when Eustace offered himself, he was greatly delighted. It had been Laxton's intention to go down to Cape Town, but Gartney persuaded him to alter his destination to the Nile and go far up into Nubia, in order to follow in the footsteps of Speke and Bruce. This arrangement was satisfactory, and Eustace and his friend began to arrange everything for their trip, which now began to assume more the appearance of an exploring expedition than a mere shooting excursion. When he had to go to San Remo in order to bring back Guy, all the preparations were left in Laxton's hands, which did not, by any means, prove irksome to that young man, as he was going in heart and soul for the business. Eustace, as he stood on the deck of a Channel steamer in the dark night, drinking in the sea breezes, thought all the time of the woman he loved kneeling beside the open coffin. She has nothing to care for now, he said to himself. God has taken away her idol, so if I bring back Guy with me, she will forgive and love him for coming to her in her sorrow. The fact was that for the first time in his life, Gartney was sacrificing self for the benefit of other people. Hitherto, he had gratified without scruple all his egotistical desires, but the hopeless love he cherished for Eliza Ellington had brought to light the nobler traits of his nature, and probably he was never a better man than now, when he was striving to bring wife and husband together for their mutual happiness, before leaving his native country for an everlasting exile, and perchance death in a savage land. Chapter 37. The Truth About Mrs. Veilsturm. We all have skeletons, everyone. We hide away from the cheerful sun. Tearful and sad, or merry and gay. We all have skeletons hidden away. Eustace duly arrived at San Remo, tired out by his long journey, and, as he had written to Guy before leaving London, was rather surprised not to find his cousin waiting for him at the railway station. However, he took the matter philosophically enough, after his usual fashion, although he was seriously annoyed at what seemed like willful negligence, and drove to the Hotel de la Mer, where Errington was staying. There he found Guy's valet awaiting his arrival in the hall, and speedily received an explanation, from which it appeared that Errington was seriously ill and confined to his bed. I would have come myself, sir, concluded the man, but Sir Guy would not let me leave him, and I have just slipped downstairs for a moment to explain things. I am very glad you have come, sir. So am I, thought Eustace, as he followed the servant upstairs. I had not any idea he was 99. No wonder he could not come to England. When he entered the bedroom, he found his cousin was really seriously ill, being in a highly excited state. He asked Eustace all kinds of questions about Eliza, about the death of the child, and talked incoherently about Mrs. Veilsturm, mixing everything up in a most nonsensical fashion, being evidently quite light-headed. Gartney answered his questions, and soothed him as well as he was able, but was very much perturbed over the matter, although he did not show his real feelings. At last he got Guy to lie down quietly, and then, leaving the room, sent for the doctor who was attending the young man. In a few minutes Dr. Storge arrived, a tall, spare man, with a keen, clever face and a sharp manner, who talked straight and to the point, without any loss of time. "Yes, Mr. Gartney," he replied briskly to Eustace's inquiry. "Sir Guy is very ill indeed, in a highly excited state brought on by worry and fretting. I saw that he was in a bad way about a week ago, when he first consulted me, but something he will not tell me about has occurred since then, and the result, well, you see it upstairs." "But surely when Errington consulted you, he explained." "He explained nothing, my dear sir, and now he is so ill that I dare not ask him, as it makes him excited, and that is what I wish to avoid. Perhaps you can give me some idea of what is wrong." "Yes, I can. Is it necessary you should know?" "What's the good of calling in a medical man if you do not intend to confide in him?" said Storge coolly. "You know what Balzac says, that a man reveals nothing to the priest, what suits him to the lawyer, and everything to the physician. I want to find out the cause of Sir Guy's excitement, and then I may do some good. As it is, well, you see for yourself, I am working in the dark." This reasoning appeared to be very just, so Gartney, making a virtue of necessity, drew his chair close to that of the doctor, and told him everything. "The fact is," said Eustace after a pause, during which he collected his thoughts, "my cousin and his wife have had a quarrel about a woman." "Ah, I thought as much, Mrs. Veilsturm." "What do you know?" "Nothing, absolutely nothing," replied the doctor sharply. "I have only put two and two together, and any fool knows that makes four more or less. Well, Sir Guy loves his wife very dearly, but she believes that he has compromised himself with, but I do not know if I ought to tell you this." Dr. Storge made a gesture of despair. "I thought you were a man of the world, Mr. Gartney," he said quickly, "but although I appreciate your delicacy with regard Towel, say our mutual friend, though I only know her by sight, I must insist upon you telling me all. Go on, my dear sir, go on. Your confession is as safe with me as it would be with one of those dingy priests in the town." Being satisfied with this explanation, Gartney smothered his scruples and went on talking. "I see it's no use beating about the bush, doctor. My cousin has quarreled with his wife on account of Mrs. Veilsturm, whom he loves." "Pardon me, no," interrupted Storge smartly. "You mean she loves him, a vastly different thing." "Nonsense. She does not care two straws about him," said Eustace bluntly. "If you do not explain, Mr. Gartney," cried the doctor angrily, "you will have me as bad as your friend upstairs." "Then listen, my dear sir, and pray do not interrupt me," said Eustace tartly. "Mrs. Veilsturm, who is a lady holding a good position in London society, thought herself slighted by Lady Errington, in what way it does not matter. She determined to revenge herself by taking Lady Errington's husband away from her, and she has succeeded. My cousin does not really care for Mrs. Veilsturm, but owing to an unfortunate misunderstanding with his wife, he has drifted into a false position. This woman has entangled him in her net and will not let him go until she can bring about a divorce, which will certainly be the end. Errington, I have no doubt, has worried himself into a fever over things, thinking he is between the devil and the deep sea, and the other day his only child died, so I expect the news of the death put the finishing stroke to the whole business." "I understand," said Storge, who had been listening attentively. "I can quite appreciate the position, and need hardly tell you, Mr. Gartney, that your cousin is dangerously 99. He is an honorable man who finds himself in a dishonorable position through no fault of his own, and the knowledge has worked him up into a state of frenzy. I am afraid of brain fever." "Good heavens, I hope not." "I am afraid so," returned the doctor sagaciously. "He's quite off the balance with all this business. However, now you are here, things may turn out better, for he must be kept quiet. Perfect rest is what is needed." "And what am I to do?" "Keep Mrs. Veilsturm away." "But she surely does not visit him," said Eustace in an astonished tone. Because, in the first place, she does not care for him, and in the second, she's too cautious to jeopardize her position in society. She does not exactly visit him, replied Storage, rising, but she sends messages, flowers, fruit, three-cornered notes, and all that rubbish. Of course it keeps Errington perpetually thinking about her than he thinks about his wife, and between the two I am afraid of the result. Well, I will go and see Mrs. Veilsturm, said Eustace grimly. I have no doubt I will be able to persuade her to leave my cousin alone. I do not envy you the interview, observed Storage, who was a sharp observer, nor her either. Still she's a fine woman. A fine devil, retorted Gartney, with less than his usual caution. She looks like it, said the doctor coolly, going to the door. A Creole is not she? Ah, I thought so. Got a considerable touch of the tiger in her, I should say. I would not like to be under her claws too risky. Well, I will go up and see our patient. And I will go and see Mrs. Veilsturm. You would better have your lunch first, said Storage, you will need all your strength. Very good advice, doctor, I will adopt it. At the same time, do not be afraid of me, I'm a match for her. Storage laughed and looked keenly at Gartney's powerful face. Yes, I think you are, he said carelessly. I have read your looks goodbye at present. When the doctor had vanished, Eustace sat down to consider the situation, which was certainly rather problematic at present, especially with regard to the Errington Veilsturm episode. When a strikingly handsome and decidedly unscrupulous woman sets her heart upon turning the head of a disconsolate man, with a somewhat weak character, she generally succeeds in her task. Guy had been certainly rather weak with regard to the sex feminine in his bachelor days, but since marriage, his love for his wife had been a safeguard against the dangerous raids of daring freelances. Owing to his unfortunate quarrel with Elizant, however, he had lost his shield, and of this Mrs. Veilsturm had taken instant advantage, securing thereby an indisputable victory. In England, Gartney had felt some doubts regarding the entanglement of his cousin with Cleopatra, but now he saw plainly that Guy was still true to his wife, and that it required the utmost dexterity of his charmer to keep her captive in chains. If he could only be brought face to face with his wife, Eustace was convinced that everything could be arranged, and the influence of Mrs. Veilsturm over this weak soul destroyed. He would like to have written to Elizant and asked her to come over in order to nurse him and be reconciled to her husband, but he was afraid she would not do so. The only thing to be done, therefore, was to try and get Errington cured as soon as possible and take him away from the dangerous neighborhood of Cleopatra. In order to do this, according to the doctor, it was necessary to force Mrs. Veilsturm to leave her victim alone, as she brought herself constantly to his mind, and exercised a malignant influence upon his whole nature highly detrimental to recovery. Eustace, therefore, agreed with the doctor that the first thing to be done was to deal with Mrs. Veilsturm, and this he made up his mind to do without delay. As Guy could not be removed from the neighborhood of Mrs. Veilsturm, the next best thing was to remove Mrs. Veilsturm from the neighborhood of Guy, or in plain words, to make her leave San Remo at once. It was a difficult task, and involved a disagreeable interview. Still, desperate diseases required desperate remedies, so Eustace wasted no time in hesitation, but determined to call upon Mrs. Veilsturm that afternoon. As Mr. Gartney was nothing if not methodical, he proceeded very deliberately with his preparations, and truth to tell, felt rather jubilant at the prospect of a tussle with Cleopatra, who was a foeman, or rather foewoman, worthy of anyone's steel. After a cold bath, which invigorated him considerably after his tiresome journey, he changed his traveling suit for one more in conformity with an afternoon visit, and then made an early luncheon, followed by a soothing cigar. His physical wants thus having been attended to, he ascertained from the list to strangers that Mrs. Veilsturm was staying at the Villa Garcia, and departed on his errand of mercy. Cleopatra had certainly an aptitude for making herself comfortable, for the Villa Garcia was a charming little house, with white walls, vivid green shutters, and dusky, red-tiled roof. Embosomed among the gray olive trees and slender palms, it stood some distance back from the Corso Imperatrice, and from its broad terrace there could be seen the tideless blue of the Mediterranean Sea, the church of the Madonna della Guardia on Capo Verde, and sometimes a glimpse of far-off Corsica floating in a golden mist, or lying amid the rosered clouds of dawn, like Brunhilde within the magic circle of Wotan's fire. Happily for Eustace, the lady he sought was at home, so on sending in his card, he was conducted to an artificially darkened drawing-room, where Mrs. Veilstorm was seated in a comfortable-looking chair, occupied with a French novel and a fan. No one was with her, as Major Griff had gone off with Thambits and Mr. Giddy for a day's pleasure at Monte Carlo, and Errington not being obtainable, Mrs. Veilstorm was delighted to see Eustace, who was much more amusing than her own thoughts. She was arrayed in a loose dress of white Chinese silk, with great masses of scarlet geranium at her throat and waist, which suited her so well that Eustace, with a view to making everything pleasant, could not help congratulating her on her appearance. "I know I am looking well," said Cleopatra indolently, as Gartney settled himself in a low chair near her. "The South always agrees with me so much better than that smoky London. That comes of being a daughter of the tropics, I suppose." "You look in your proper place under a burning sky," observed Eustace poetically. "There is more of the gorgeous cactus about you than the English rose." "Am I to take that as a compliment?" "Most women would." "I dare say, but then you see I am unlike most women," replied Cleopatra, fanning herself slowly. "It's rather a good thing, I think myself. What a horrible idea to be a replica of half a dozen of one's dearest enemies." "Have you any enemies?" asked Eustace, looking keenly at her. "Plenty, principally of my own sex, I think. It does not trouble me, however, as I think it is rather a distinction than otherwise. A person without enemies must be without character. By the way, Mr. Gartney, I have not asked you what you are doing in San Remo." "What do you think?" "It's too hot to answer riddles," replied Mrs. Veilstorm languidly. "I am sure I cannot tell. Restoring your health, writing a book, hiding from your friends. There, I have given you a choice of 3 answers. None of which are right. I have come over to attend to my cousin Errington." "How devoted of you," said the lady ironically. "I was not aware you were so fond of your cousin as all that." "Were you not?" answered Eustace nonchalantly. "Rather an oversight on your part, seeing that Errington and myself have been close friends all our lives." An angry color glowed in Cleopatra's swarthy face as she detected a covert insolence in this reply, but, having a sharp tongue of her own, she lost no time in answering. "Ah, I see, like does not always draw to like." "Certainly not in this case, but the reverse is true. I am not a bit like Errington in any way. For example, I can always take care of myself." "And Sir Guy cannot, I suppose." "Not when there's a woman in the case, as there is now." Mrs. Veilstorm had never liked Eustace, as he knew more about her former life than she cared he should, but being an eminently diplomatic woman, she had always treated him as a friend. Now, however, she saw that his attitude was distinctly hostile, and prepared to give battle. They were now matching their wits against one another, and each knew it would take wonderful skill and cautious dealing in order to come off victor in such a remarkably equal contest. "I do not understand you," said Mrs. Veilstorm after a pause. "Try," responded Eustace curtly. "Why should I?" "Because you understand well enough, only you will not admit it." "Do you know, Mr. Gartney, you are very rude," said the Creole quietly. "Pshaw," cried Eustace angrily, "it's no use our fencing with buttons on the foils. I have come here for a certain purpose, and you know what it is." "I am sure I do not," said Mrs. Veilstorm doggedly. "None so blind as those who will not see." "Pithy," retorted Cleopatra sneeringly, "very pithy, but irrelevant." "Not at all, as I will soon show you. Look here, Mrs. Veilstorm, I am going to be plain, brutally plain." "To do you justice, you generally are." "It is necessary in some cases, especially in this one," said Gartney quietly, "but I am not here to discuss my personal character, but to save my cousin." "From me, I presume." "Exactly, I did not think you would have admitted that." She had made a false move in doing so, and saw that Eustace had taken advantage of her rashness. So, throwing down her book, she sat straight up in her chair and spoke with firm deliberation. "You are talking nonsense, my dear Mr. Gartney, which is a thing I do not care about. You say you have come here for a certain purpose. Perhaps you will be kind enough to tell me the meaning of that remark." "Certainly," replied Gartney promptly. "I know all about the way you consider yourself to have been slighted by Lady Errington. I know that you have tried your best to inveigle Errington into your net in order to be revenged, and I have come here to ask you to leave my cousin alone, and leave San Remo." "A very cool request, upon my word," cried the Creole viciously, with an evil smile on her angry face, "but one I do not intend to comply with. I think it will be as well for you to do so." She sprang to her feet in a fury, and stood looking at him, with clenched hands and face convulsed with rage. "You threaten me, do you?" she shrieked savagely. "How dare you, how dare you? I shall tell Major Griff, I shall tell." "You will tell no one," said Gartney calmly, "that is, you will not if you are wise." Cleopatra stood silent for a moment, struggling with her temper, then, stamping her foot, walked rapidly up and down the room, Eustace watching her meanwhile with a sardonic smile on his lips. He also had risen to his feet, as knowing Mariquita's temper of old, he thought it wise to be prepared for possibilities. At last the lady collected herself sufficiently to talk quietly, and stopping opposite her antagonist, spoke in a low, suppressed voice, which was far more deadly in its meaning than the first outburst of wrath. "As you say, we may as well take the buttons off the foils. Consider them removed." "So far, so good," assented Eustace, not taking his eyes off her. "Go on." "Carambo! You still remember your Spanish, I see," he said mockingly, "but we are not in South America now." "I wish we were," she hissed savagely, bringing her beautiful, distorted face so close to his own that he felt her hot breath on his cheek. "Oh, I wish we were." "I do not," he replied without blenching. "You might treat me as you did Manuel." "No, no," she cried, a terrified expression flitting across her face. Not that name here." "Then let us keep to the subject in hand," said Eustace politely. If a look could have killed Gartney, he would have there and then fallen dead at the feet of the Creole, but suddenly changing her tactics, she flung herself on the sofa in a storm of tears. "How cruel you are, oh how cruel," she wailed, hiding her face in the cushions. "I am only a woman, you cowardly a woman." "You are a remarkably good actress, my dear Mrs. Veilsturm," replied Eustace coolly, in no wise moved by her sorrow, "but tears are very weak. Try something else more original." After this scoffing remark he resumed his seat, and waited till her passion should have exhausted itself, which happened very soon, for Mrs. Veilsturm was too sensible a woman to waste her weapons when she found they were useless. Drying her eyes carefully, she sat up again quite cool and composed, which warned Eustace that he must be more on his guard than ever. "Your cousin's a fool," she said viciously. "Do you think it was any pleasure for me to have him running after me? No, I hate and detest him, the persistent boor that he is." "Do not you think you would better drop these flowers of speech?" replied Eustace leisurely. "They are neither pretty nor necessary. Go on with the main subject." "I will come to that quick enough," retorted Mrs. Veilsturm sullenly. "You are right about Lady Errington did slight me, and in a way no woman can forgive nor forget. I would hate her if it were only for the fact that she is Gabriel Mostyn's daughter's traitor, but I hate her twice as much on my own account. I vowed I would punish her for the insult, and I will too. By causing a divorce. Either that or separating them altogether, and I think I have managed that now." "You can think what you please," said Eustace coolly, "but at all events you have done your worst." "Not yet, not yet." "Oh yes, you have. Now you are going to write my cousin a letter, saying you do not care about him, or well, say what you like, but give him to understand you will not see him again." "And then," she demanded with a sneer, "and then you will leave San Remo as soon as you conveniently can." She burst out into a peal of ironical laughter. Do you actually expect me to do that? I do, and I am certain you will do it. I will not. No. No. They looked at one another in silence, she tapping her foot on the ground with a scornful smile, he eyeing her with calm deliberation. If you do not go to that desk and write what I ask you, he said at length, in a low, clear voice, I will tell the world all I know about Lola Trujillo. Her face grew very pale, but she answered defiantly. Do so, no one can connect her with me. Ah, so you think, but I have enough proofs to do so. Do what you like, I defy you. I don't think it will be wise of you to do so, said Eustace in a low voice of concentrated fury. You know me, Lola, and I know you, and all the world of South America knows you also. He jumped up, and crossing over to the sofa, bent down and whispered in her ear. I can tell about your connection with Gabriel Mostyn, in regard to that boy, his son who disappeared. I had nothing to do with it, she muttered, shrinking from him. And Manuel Lopez. Be silent. And that little gambling saloon at Lima. Hush, for God's sake, you will ruin me. I intend to, said Eustace relentlessly, unless, and he pointed to the desk. Without saying a word, she arose to her feet, and dragging herself slowly across the room sat down at the desk and began to write. Eustace said nothing, but remained standing by the sofa with a smile of satisfaction on his massive features. Nothing was heard in the room but the steady ticking of the clock, and the scratching of Mrs. Veilström's pen as it moved rapidly over the paper. In a few minutes she came back to him holding out a sheet of paper, which he read carefully without taking it out of her hand. That will do, he said quietly. Will you be so kind as to put it into an envelope and direct it? Darting a look of hatred at him, which showed how hard it was for her to control her temper, she returned to the desk and did what he asked. Then, leaving it on the blotting paper, she went to her seat by the window, while Eustace, picking up the letter, glanced at the address and slipped it into his inner pocket. And about leaving San Remo, he asked, turning towards Mrs. Veilström. I will leave in 3 days, she replied harshly. Will that suit you? Yes, I will not see you again. Bon voyage. He turned to go, but Mrs. Veilström's voice arrested him. Of course you will say nothing about South America, she said quietly. No, you have done your part, and I will do mine. I would not go to Lima again if I were you, said Mrs. Veilström, with deadly hatred. It might be dangerous. I have no doubt of that, replied Eustace carelessly. If you want to turn the tables, you had better send your emissaries to Africa. He left the room without another word, and Cleopatra, sitting at the window, saw him walking down the garden path. She was holding her handkerchief in her hands, and with a sudden anger tore it in two. If it had only been in South America, she said in a low, fierce voice. Oh, if it had only been in South America. Chapter 38, The Last Temptation. Death ever rends asunder marriage bonds. So should he die, this husband undesired. She would be free to woo and wed again. And I might haply gain her hand, her heart. Yet there is folly in this argument. For such a course would breed but sterile love. Seeing the first link in the chain of circumstance. Is ominous indeed a dead man's grave. Having thus routed the enemy, Eustace returned to his hotel very well satisfied with his victory, which he hoped would be productive of good in removing the obstacle to the reconciliation of husband and wife. For his own part, he felt considerable astonishment at the self-abnegation of his conduct, seeing that he was doing his best to place the woman he loved so devotedly beyond any possible chance of being anything to him. But since his last interview with Lady Errington, the astute man of the world had been quick to read her true feelings, and had therefore given up all hope of winning her love. Besides, he had arranged with Laxton to go to Africa, and had it not been for the accident of Guy's illness, would have started almost immediately for that mysterious continent, but since things had turned out otherwise, he resolved to do his duty by his cousin, even against his desire of gratifying self. It was true he had done all in his power to conquer this dominant faculty of egotism. He had parted with Eliza forever. He had saved Errington from the machinations of Mrs. Veilsturm, but the great temptation was yet to come, and in a guise least anticipated by the tempted. Of course, he told Dr. Storage about his success in the delicate matter of Mrs. Veilsturm, at which success the physician expressed himself highly delighted, as he undoubtedly thought that the removal of this disturbing influence on Errington's life would have a beneficial result on his health. Doctors are not infallible, however, and the result of this attempt to quiet the patient's mind only succeeded in exciting it still more, which state of the case considerably dismayed both Storage and Gartney. Guy, being under the impression that his wife had cast him off forever, had been touched by the interest displayed towards him by Mrs. Veilsturm, and clung to the idea of her disinterested affection as a drowning man clings to a straw. An old simile, certainly, but one that holds good in this case. He thought that his wife did not love him, that she had never loved him, and that Cleopatra was the only woman who had any tender feelings towards him in her heart. It was true that the world, a notoriously ungenerous critic, said that she was capricious, cruel, fickle as the windstill. So cleverly had she feigned a love she did not feel, that Errington really believed he had inspired a genuine feeling in her hard heart. Every day, when tender messages arrived for him with presents of fruit and flowers, he mentally thanked heaven that one woman, at least, truly loved and remembered him in his hour of trouble. When, however, the messages with their accompanying gifts of fruit and flowers ceased to arrive, he wondered at the omission and became querulously suspicious. Why had she forgotten him? What was the reason of this sudden change? Could she be false to him, seeing that she had made such protestations of love? No, it could not be, and yet there must be some reason. These were the questions he kept continually asking himself, and thereby working himself into such mad frenzies that it seemed as though nothing could avert the threatened attack of brain fever. True to her promise, which would cost her too much to break, Mrs. Veilsturm had departed from San Remo and taken up her abode at Nice, together with the Major, Dolly Thambits and Mr. Giddy, alleging that she found the Italian watering-place dull and preferred the lively Gauls to the more sedate Latins. Errington, however, knew nothing of this sudden exodus, and his excited brain suggested 1,000 reasons for the sudden silence of his quondam charmer. She was ill, she was afraid of exciting him. She had been called to England on business. What could be the reason of this sudden change from attention to neglect, from warmth to coldness? And day and night and day, the weary brain puzzled over these perplexing questions, suggesting and discarding 1,000 answers with every tick of the clock. Eustace did his best to allay his cousin's excitement without telling him the truth, but all to no purpose. So, in despair, he spoke seriously to Storage as to what was best to be done under the circumstances. "Things cannot go on like this much longer," he said decisively. "If my cousin was ill when I arrived, he seems to me to be much worse now." "It's a very difficult case," remarked Storage musingly. "So difficult that I hardly know what step to take. I have made him keep to his room, see no one, given him sedatives, and yet he is no better. In fact, I think we are only at the beginning of the trouble." "Well, I have got that woman out of the way," said Eustace bluntly, "so that is something gained." "I am not so sure of that," replied the doctor, biting his nails, a habit he had when irritated. "Of course I advised it, and it was done for the best. Still, upon my soul, Mr. Gartney, you must think me a fool. Here am I, a duly accredited 1,500, yet I do not know what steps to take in order to cure my patient." "It is perplexing," sighed Eustace, drumming with his fingers on the table. "Errington has got it into his head that this woman is his good angel Fa. To what lengths will love carry a man?" "But you said he was not in love with her." "Neither is he. This is one of those rare cases which are veritable enigmas, most unaccountable. As far as I can see, the whole thing is simply this. My cousin thinks his wife hates him, and as Mrs. Veilsturm has played her game so cleverly, believes she loves him. He does not love her, but he is intensely grateful for what he thinks is her disinterested kindness. Now she has withdrawn the light of her countenance. He imagines that he is forsaken for the second time, and his feeling is one of absolute despair. Thou canst not minister to a mind diseased, quoted Storge, musingly. A very true remark of Shakespeare's. It seems to me, judging from your theory, with which I must say I agree, that I am in very much the same dilemma. My drugs are no use while his mind is in such a turmoil. You cure his mind, Gartney, and I will cure his body. It's all very well saying that, replied Eustace pettishly. You give me the hardest task. Suppose you send for his wife. She will not come. But surely when she knows. I tell you she will not come, repeated Eustace sternly. She thinks he has behaved shamefully, and I am afraid she is rather unforgiving. Storge ran his hands through his hair in a most perplexed fashion, but made no reply, as he was quite at his wits' end what to suggest. It was, as he suggested, more a mental than a physical case, and though he felt himself competent to deal with nerves, brain, or tissues, he was quite helpless in this emergency, which required the aid of external circumstances. Those external circumstances were best known to Eustace Gartney, so that gentleman was the only man who could have any influence in the matter. I tell you what, said Gartney, after a pause, during which he had been thinking deeply. Errington imagines Mrs. Veilstorm an angel of light, and is worrying himself because he thinks a good woman has forgotten him. Suppose I show her to him in her true colors, and then, finished the doctor caustically, you will fix him up nicely for a very bad attack of brain fever. That is one presumption. The only one. I do not agree with you. I will undeceive him about Mrs. Veilstorm, and then he will see the snare he has escaped. Oh, and do you think that will quiet him? Asked Dr. Storge sarcastically. I think it will turn his thoughts back to his wife. If so, I will write to her to come over. What about the forgiveness? I will tell her it's a case of life and death. That will surely soften her. You whirl about like a weathercock, my friend, said Storge grimly. You tell me decisively that the wife is unforgiving, and will not come, then you say she might soften, which view is the right one. Both. Impossible. Nothing is impossible with regard to a woman, but what do you say to my plan? I do not know what to say. Then I will try it, said Eustace determinedly. I do not approve of it, remarked Storge in desperation. Still, as it's a case of brain fever, if things go on like this, the chance of accelerating the disease does not make much difference, so you would better begin your disillusionizing at once. Very well, replied Gartney with a sigh of relief, and this closed the conversation. It was a disagreeable task to undertake, but not more so than that connected with Mrs. Veilstorm, and Eustace made up his mind to speak to Errington at once. The sooner things are brought to a crisis the better, he thought, as he went up to his cousin's room. As they stand now, it's quite impossible to move either way. Guy was lying with his arms outside the counterpane when Mr. Gartney entered and turned his eyes, unnaturally bright, in the direction of the door when he heard his cousin's footstep. Anything from Mrs. Veilstorm? He asked eagerly. Nothing, responded Eustace, and took a seat beside the bed. What can be the matter with her? Said Guy feverishly. Eustace, why do not you find out? It's cruel of you to keep me in suspense. I will not keep you in suspense any longer. What? Guy sat up in his bed with a cry, but Eustace forced him to lie down again. Keep quiet, or I will not tell you, he said sternly. By the way, if you do not want Albert, he had better go downstairs. I want to speak to you privately. Yes, yes, you can go, Albert. Mr. Gartney will stay with me. The well-trained valet bowed his head in answer, arranged a few things on the little table beside the bed, and then noiselessly withdrew, leaving the cousins together. Well, Eustace, well, said Guy, plucking restlessly at the bedclothes. What is the matter? Nothing wrong with Mrs. Veilstorm. Not that I am aware of, responded Gartney dryly. She is a lady who can take remarkably good care of herself. Do not talk like that about her, said Guy with weak anger. She is my friend. Your friend, repeated Eustace scornfully. Yes, the same kind of friend as she is to every man. Eustace! He sat up again with a fierce look on his face, but the calm gaze of his cousin disconcerted him, and he sank back on the pillows with an impatient sigh. I do not understand you, he said fretfully. I do not understand me head is a chingetching terribly. Guy, old fellow, said Eustace, in his low, soft voice, which had such an indescribable charm in its tones, I want to speak to you about your wife. My wife's. Yes, I have a confession to make to you. I love your wife. Guy looked at his cousin vacantly, and as if he did not understand. You love my wife, he repeated mechanically. You love my wife. Yes, said Eustace, steadily, going through his self-imposed ordeal with stern determination, although his face was gray with anguish, and his heart ached with pain and self-humiliation. It's a terrible thing to confess to Udo her husband, but true nevertheless. When I first saw her at Como, I worshipped her for that calm, spiritual loveliness which made her so beautiful in my eyes. But I said nothing, and went into exile for her sake, trusting to come back and find her a happy wife and mother. I went away to forget, and I came back to remember. Oh, Guy, if you only knew how I have despised myself for thus thinking about your wife. But believe me, it was not in the sensual fashion of the world that I loved her. I worshipped her as one might worship a star which is higher and purer than he who kneels to its splendor. My love was pure, still I strove to crush it out of my heart, but all in vain. I came back to England and saw her once more, a happy mother indeed, but not a happy wife. It was not your fault, my poor boy, for I know you did your best to win her heart, but her child blinded her better nature, and she could not see that the father yearned for love, and required it as much as the son. Then came the episode of Mrs. Veilsturm, which was one of those cruel decrees of fate which no man can guard against. It parted you, as I thought, forever, and you obeyed the instincts of your lower nature, while she remained sternly unforgiving in her purity, a purity which could not understand the temptations of a weaker soul. I tried my best to make her look more kindly on your mistake as I am a living man, Guy. I did my best to bring you together again, but it was all useless. Then I lost my head, the devil whispered in my ear, and I spoke to her of love, and the result was what you might have expected from your wife. She told me that she loved her child, and would not stoop to dishonor for his sake. But she said more not in words indeed, but in looks, in manner, in irrepressible tears that she loved you, Guy, that she was sorry for her cruel justice, that she longed for the father of her child, for the husband of her vows, to clasp her in his arms once more. I was punished for my daring to lift my eyes to her. I saw that I could be nothing to such spotless purity of soul, and I went away into the outer darkness, intending to exile myself forever from her sight. Then the child whom she worshipped, the child who was your strongest rival in her affections, and now she sits alone, and in solitude robbed of her nearest and dearest, waiting for the sound of her husband's voice, for the clasp of his arms, for the touch of his lips. In his fervor he had slipped from his chair, and was now kneeling beside the bed, holding his cousin's hot hand in his own. The sick man had listened dully to the long speech, but at the end he flung up his disengaged hand with a bitter cry. No, no, it is too late, it is too late. It is not too late, said Eustace earnestly. I have told you the truth. I have humiliated myself in your eyes because I am anxious to repair my fault, to bring you together again. Let me send for your wife, Guy, and believe me, she will come, only too gladly, to your sick bed with words of forgiveness and regret. But the sick man rolled his head from side to side on the pillow with dreary despair. No, no, it cannot be. My wife can never be mine again, Mariquita. Mariquita Veilsturm, interrupted Eustace sternly, do not mention her name in connection with that of your wife. She was kind to me when Elizan was so cruel. Kind, yes, for her own ends. Listen to me, Guy. Mrs. Veilsturm has been using you as a means of revenge against your wife. All the listless despair disappeared from Errington's face, and he wrenched his hand angrily away from Eustace. What do you mean? Exactly what I say, said Eustace hurriedly, seeing that his cousin was getting excited, and determined to have the whole thing over and done with it at once. Do you think Mrs. Veilstrom ever forgave or forgot the slight she received from your wife? Not she, I know Mrs. Veilstrom, none better. However, I am going to say nothing about her except this, that she pretended to love you in order to cause trouble between yourself and your wife. And now that she has succeeded, she has gone off and left you, ill as you are, to do the best you can without her. No, it's not true. It cannot be true, raved Guy fiercely. You malign her, she is a true good woman, she loves Mesh, loves me. I tell you she does not, said Eustace, rising to his feet, so as to be ready for any emergency, for Guy looked so wild that he was afraid he would spring upon him. Liar, you cannot prove it. I can, and by her own handwriting. Guy snatched the letter Eustace held out to him, tore open the envelope, glanced over the few cruel words of dismissal, and then, dropping the paper, covered his face with his hands, moaning pitifully. You see now, my dear Guy, what this woman really is, said Gartney tranquilly, picking up the letter. A vindictive vixen who simply used you for her own ends. The baronet uncovered his face, and looked at Eustace in a vacant manner, his eyes large and bright, his lips twitching with nervous agitation, and a feverish flush on his hot, dry skin. I must go to her, he said in a shrill voice, trying to rise from his bed. I must see her. No, no, it's impossible, cried Eustace in alarm, holding him back. Be reasonable, Guy, be reasonable. Stay where you are, Guy. But Guy was now past all understanding, and struggled vehemently with Eustace, uttering short cries of rage and terror like a caged animal. His cousin's heart bled for the frenzied agony of the unhappy man, but he saw that Guy was rapidly getting worse, and shouted for assistance. No one answered, however, so having forced Guy to lie down with a great effort, Eustace ran to the electric bell, and in a moment its shrill summons rang through the house. In that moment, however, Guy was out of bed, making for the window, swaying, staggering, raving, with outstretched hands, and Eustace had just time to throw himself on the madman, for he was nothing else at present hand prevent him breaking the glass. Albert entered, and seeing the state of affairs, shouted for aid and came forward to help Gartney, whose valet also came upstairs in answer to their cries, and between them the three men managed to get Guy back to bed, where they held him down, raving, crying, shrieking, and entirely insane. Leaving the two servants in charge, Eustace went downstairs and sent for the doctor, who arrived speedily on the scene and prescribed such remedies as were necessary, although, truth to tell, he could do but little. Just what I expected, he said grimly, when things were going smoother, and now, Mr. Gartney, as you have carried out your first intention, perhaps you will carry out the second and send for his wife. I suppose I must. It's a case of life and death, said Storge, and walked out of the room. In 2 minutes Eustace was on his way to the telegraph office. As he walked rapidly down the street, the temptation came, the terrible temptation that whispered to him not to send for Elizon. If you do not, whispered the devil on his left, Guy will die, and you will be able to gain her for your wife. No, said the good angel on his right. She can never love you, you could buy nothing, not even happiness, at the price of your cousin's death. So Eustace walked along with these two angels, the bad and the good, whispering in his ears, now inclining to one, now to the other, fighting desperately against the temptations of the devil, and again yielding to the insidious whisper of future joy to be won by a simple act of neglect. In that short walk a whole lifetime of agony passed, but no one looking at this stalwart, calm-faced man striding along the street could have guessed the hell that raged within. The powers of good and evil fought desperately for the possession of this weak, wavering soul that was in such sore straits, but in the end the good angel prevailed, and Eustace sat down to write his telegram. He wrote one to Elizon, as strongly worded as he was able, and a second to Otterburn, telling him he must bring Lady Errington over at once. In both he wrote the words, "It is a case of life and death," those words that had been ringing in his ears ever since the doctor had said them. Then, as he handed the telegram to the clerk, the temptation again assailed him. It was not too late. Let him withdraw the messages, tear them up, and there would be a chance of his winning the woman he loved instead of going into voluntary exile. But at the price of a man's life? No, that was too big a price to pay, and Yeth put down the money demanded by the clerk and walked out of the post office. Outside in the sunshine, he stood with drops of sweat on his forehead, and the soul that had been saved from the commission of a great crime put up a prayer of thanks to God that this last temptation had passed, and that the powers of evil had not prevailed in the hour of weakness. Chapter 39, and kissed again with tears. You have returned with your face so fair, your sweet blue eyes and your golden hair, again to cherish, again to share this life of mine with its joy and care. Alas, my dearest, the days were long, when memories came in a countless throng, to sing to my heart such a haunting song of things once right that had changed to wrong. You have returned just to heal the smart that sorrow made with her cruel dart. Never again will we sigh and part. You once more are my leal sweetheart. The Hun, Angus MacIan's experiences of early married life could hardly be called pleasant, seeing the demands made upon himself and his bride by their mutual friends. Shortly after their marriage, Aunt Jelly had died, thereby causing them to return to London before the end of the honeymoon. Then, during their visit to Lord Dunkeld, Mrs. Macian had been summoned south in order to console Lady Errington for the loss of her child, and now as Eustace had telegraphed Alison to come over to her sick husband at San Remo, it was necessary that Otterburn should escort her, for it was impossible, in her present state of grief, that she could travel alone. The young couple, therefore, did not get so much of each other's company as they desired, and it said a great deal for the good nature of both, that they were so ready to comfort the mourner, at the sacrifice of their own desires and the upsetting of all their plans. Life at Errington Hall was very dreary after the death of the heir, as Victoria was constantly with the unhappy mother and Otterburn was left to wander about with nothing but his own thoughts, which were not particularly cheerful in the present aspect of affairs. Then came the funeral, which Macian had to look after entirely by himself, as Eustace and Errington were both absent. The young man had received a letter from Gartney, stating that Guy was too ill to travel, and Victoria had shown it to Alison, but wrapped up in the selfishness of grief for her great loss, she had made hardly any remark about this new blow. Then came the peremptory telegrams summoning the wife to the bedside of her sick husband, and Otterburn, through his wife, delicately offered to accompany Lady Errington to San Remo as soon as she was ready to start. Alison was a long time making up her mind about going, as she considered that her husband had grossly insulted her by his openly displayed passion for Mrs. Veilsturm. Still, on calm reflection, she saw that she was to a great extent blamable for his folly, and as the death of Sammy had considerably softened her heart towards his wrongdoing, she determined to fulfill her duty as a wife and go across to the Riviera at once. The child's death had left a blank in her heart, and she felt that she must have someone to love and console her, or she would go mad in the loneliness of her grief. So with these thoughts in her heart, she sent a telegram to Eustace, announcing her departure, and prepared for the journey. She accepted Otterburn's escort as far as San Remo, but promised that as soon as she was established by Guy's sick bed, Angus should return to his wife, who was to be left behind at Errington Hall. Angus agreed to this, and in company with the young man and her maid, she left Victoria Station en route for the Italian Riviera. The whole journey seemed to her like a dream. The bright English landscape which she knew so well, the breezy passage across the channel with the tossing waves and blue sky, Calais with its bustling crowd of natives and tourists, the long journey through the pleasant Norman country, and then Paris, gay and glittering, where they stayed all night. Next morning again in the train rushing southward, past quaint, medieval towns, with their high-peaked houses, over slow-flowing rivers, through ancient forests already bearing the touch of autumn's fingerstill onward, till they reached Marseille, sitting by the blue waters of the Mediterranean. Afterwards, they continued their journey through smiling Provence. Along the sunny Riviera, Mentone, Nice, all passed in their turn. A glimpse of Monte Carlo, where the goddess of play sits enthroned on high palm-crowned Bordicaradeserded Ospedaletti, with its lonely Casanode at last, San Remo, amid her grey olive groves, at the foot of the Blue Hills. Eustace was waiting for them at the railway station, looking very grave, and bowed silently to Lady Errington as she stepped out of the carriage. "Is he better?" she asked, looking haggardly at him, a tall, slender figure in her sweeping black robes. "I am afraid not. Still, we hope for the best." She made no reply, so after greeting Otterburn, Eustace conducted them to a carriage, and they drove to the Hotel de la Mure. Alison lost no time, but asked to be taken at once to her husband's room. Eustace tried to prepare her mind, so that the shock of seeing him should not be too much, but she disregarded all his entreaties and went up to the darkened apartment where her husband was lying. One question only she asked Gartney before she entered. "Is that woman here?" "Do you think I would have sent for you had she been?" He replied, deeply hurt. "No, she has left San Remo and will trouble you no more." "You're doing?" "Yes." She gave him her slender, black-gloved hand for a moment, and then passed to her husband's bedside, where her place was henceforth to be. The next morning Otterburn, having discharged his duty, returned to his wife, and Lady Errington was left alone with Eustace to nurse the man whom she never thought to meet with kindly feeling again. Guy was terribly ill for a long time, but as out of evil good sometimes comes, there was no doubt that this illness was beneficial, inasmuch as it showed Alison the true state of her husband's heart. In those long, dreary hours, as she sat beside the bed listening to his incoherent ravings, she heard sufficient to convince her that Guy had always tenderly loved her, that his apparent infidelity was the result of despair, and that a word of forgiveness from her would have saved him from the misery he had suffered. No explanation on the part of Eustace Gartney, no explanation from her husband, had he been in good health, would have convinced her of the truth, and there would always have lurked in her heart a terrible suspicion that she had been sinned against, which would have embittered her whole life. She would have perhaps forgiven her husband, but she nevertheless would have believed him guilty, and his presence would have been a constant regret and reproach to the purity of her soul. But these wild mutterings, these agonized ravings, revealed the true state of things, revealed at once his weakness and his strength. So little by little the scales fell from her eyes, and she saw how noble was this nature, how weak was the soul, and how needful to its well-being was love and tenderness. Again, since the death of her child, a terrible sense of utter loneliness had fallen upon her, and now that she saw her mistaken judgment of Guy's character, all her being yearned for his love. And this woman, who had only respected and admired him when he was well and strong, now that he was prostrate and weak, passionately loved him with all the intensity of her nature. The coldness of her nature had departed, the frozen heart had melted, and often, overcome with terror and dread, she flung herself on her knees beside the bed, praying to God to spare her the husband she had never understood nor loved till now. She never spoke to Eustace about Mrs. Veilstrom. All she knew or cared to know was that this obstacle that had stood between herself and her husband had been removed, and that the true feelings of that husband had been revealed to her by the hand of God. During all this time Eustace acted the part of a brother, and never by word or deed betrayed the true state of his feelings. Heaven alone knew how he suffered in maintaining a cold, patient demeanor towards the woman he loved, and his life, from the time of her arrival till the hour he left San Remo, was one long martyrdom. Often she wondered at his stoical calmness and apparent forgetfulness of the words he had spoken to her at Errington Hall, but neither of them made any reference to the past, and she thought that he was now cured of his passion. Cured, Eustace laughed aloud to himself as he divined her thoughts and contentment that it should be so, and he counted the hours feverishly until such time as he could leave her with a convalescent husband and depart from her presence, where he had to hide his real feelings under a mask of cynical indifference. Owing to the unintermitting care of Dr. Storge, the careful nursing of his wife, and the watchful tenderness of Gartney, the man who had been sick unto death slowly recovered. The long nights of agony and delirium were succeeded by hours of peaceful slumber, the disordered brain righted itself slowly, and the vacant stare of the eyes and babble of the tongue were succeeded by the light of sanity and the words of sense. He was weak. It is truly weak, but the first moment of joy she had known since the death of her child came to Elizen when one morning, while kneeling beside his bed, he called her faintly by her name. Elizen. Yes, dear, your wife. His wife. Was this his cold, stately wife who knelt so fondly beside him? Were those eyes shining with love, wet with tears the cold blue eyes that had so often frozen all demonstrations of affection? Was that face, full of joyful relief and emotion, the marble countenance that had never smiled lovingly on him since he had first beheld it? No, it could not be. Elizen. It was some deceptive vision of the brain, painting what might have been, and yet she saw his state of bewilderment, and, bending over, kissed him tenderly. It is your wife, wife not in name only but in love and trust. A smile of joy flitted across his worn face, and he strove to put out one weak hand. Forgive, he said faintly, forgive. It is I who should ask forgiveness, she replied in a broken voice. I was harsh and cold, my dearest, and I do ask your forgiveness. Hush, do not say a word. You are very weak, and must not talk. Let me nurse you back to health again, and then I will strive to be a better wife to you than I have hitherto been. He said nothing, but lay on his pillows, with eyes shining with love, a contented smile on his lips, and fell asleep, still holding his wife's hand in his own. After this he mended quickly, for with the return of Elizen's affection, the desire of life had come back, and each day he grew stronger because the vexed brain was now at rest, and the love of his wife was a better medicine than any drugs of the doctor. You see, said Storge to Eustace on leaving the chamber one day when Guy had been pronounced convalescent, what has cured him is not my medicines, but his wife's affection. Ah, Shakespeare was a wise man when he said, Thou canst not minister unto a mind diseased. Love is the only cure there. Lucky mind to have such a cure, replied Gartney with a sigh. Some minds have to bear their diseases till the end of life with no chance of being mended. Storge said nothing, but he looked at him curiously, for he half guessed the real state of the case, and sincerely pitied Eustace for his unhappy passion. Poor fellow, he thought as he departed, he has wealth, health, fame, and popularity, yet he would give all these for what he will never obtain the heart of that woman. Guy's complete recovery was now only a question of a few weeks, so Eustace, feeling that he could not keep up the pretense of indifference much longer, made up his mind to depart. With this idea he produced a letter from Laxton one evening when he was seated with Elizen by the bed of the convalescent. I have just got a letter from my friend, he said cheerfully, and he wants me to come back to England at once. What for? Asked Guy quickly. Oh, our African expedition, you know, replied Eustace, smoothing out the letter. I put it off because of your illness, but now you are on the way to recovery I can leave you with safety in the hands of Elizen. I never saw such a fellow, said Guy fretfully. Why on earth cannot you stay at home, instead of scampering all round the world? Eustace laughed, yet his mirth was rather forced. I am afraid I have got a strain of gypsy blood in me somewhere, he said, jokingly, and I cannot rest. Besides, I really and truly prefer savages to civilized idiots of the London type. They are every bit as decent, and much more amusing. All this time, Lady Errington had remained silent in deep thought, but at the conclusion of Gartney's speech, she looked up with a grave face. When do you start? She asked quietly. Tomorrow morning. So soon, she said with a start. Hang it, Eustace, you might have given us longer notice, remarked Guy, in a displeased tone of voice. Cui bono, said Gartney listlessly. Long leave-takings are a mistake, I think the opposite of linked sweetness long drawn out. I always like to come and go quickly, so I will say good-bye tonight, and be off the first thing in the morning. Neither Guy nor his wife made any further remark, as they both felt dimly that it would be happier for Eustace to go away as soon as possible. It was not ingratitude, it was not a desire to lose his company, but what he had said to the wife, and what he had said to the husband, recurred to both their memories, and they silently acquiesced in his decision. "Before I go," said Eustace, after a pause, "there is one thing I wish to say. Can I speak to you both without offense?" "Certainly," replied Guy, wondering what was coming. "We both owe you more than we can ever repay." "You can repay it easily," said Gartney, quickly, "by accepting the proposition I am about to make." "Let us hear what it is first," observed Alison, looking up for a moment with a faint smile on her lips. "It will not take long to explain," answered Gartney, in a matter-of-fact tone. "You know I am rich enough to indulge all my whims and fancies, so this new access of wealth from Aunt Jelly is absolutely useless to me. It ought to have been left to Guy, and had I spoken to Aunt Jelly before she died, no doubt I would have made her see this. As it is, however, it has been left to me, and I do not want it. Guy, however, does so. I wish to make him a free gift of all the property before leaving for Africa." "No," said Guy resolutely, "I will not take a penny." "Why not?" "Because it was left to you. I do not want to rob you." "It's not a question of robbery," said Eustace, coolly. "If the money was of any use to me, I would keep it. But it is not. I do not even know that I would touch it, so it's far better to be employed by you than lying idle in my bank. What do you say, Alison?" She flushed painfully. "What can I say?" "That you will persuade this obstinate husband of yours to take the money." "But suppose he will not accept?" "Which is his firm intention," said Guy quickly. "In that case," remarked Eustace grimly, "I shall simply hand it over to the most convenient charity, say the Society for the Suppression of Critics, or the Fund for Converted Publishers, but keep it. I will not." "You are talking nonsense," cried Guy impatiently. "The sober truth, I assure you." There was silence for a few moments, and at last the silence was broken by Guy. "If I thought you were in earnest," he began slowly. "Dead earnest," said Eustace. "Then I suppose it will be best to accept your quixotic offer." "I am glad you look at it in such a sensible light," retorted Gartney with an air of great relief. "You agree with Guy, Alison?" She raised her eyes slowly to his face, and looked steadily at him before making her reply. "Yes, I agree with Guy," she answered frankly. "Then it's settled," said Eustace with a huge sigh. "I cannot tell you how glad I am to escape being buried under this weight of wealth, like Tarpeia under the shields of the Sabines. An old illustration, is it not, but remarkably apt. You will be able to clear the mortgages off the Hall, Guy, and live there in a manner befitting the place. I will see my lawyers as soon as I return to England, so you will have no further trouble over the matter." "And what about yourself?" asked Alison impulsively. "Myself," he echoed, rising slowly from his chair. "Oh, I am going away to foreign parts. The land of Chem, the blameless Ethiopians, secret sources of the Nile, and all that kind of thing." "But when you come back," said Errington, raising himself on his elbow. "When I come back," said Eustace sadly, a presentiment of coming doom heavy on his soul, "then I will see you both happy and honored. Perhaps you will find a domestic seat for me by the domestic hearth, and I will tell stories of mysterious lands to future generations of Erringtons." Again silence, a painful, oppressive silence, which seemed to last an eternity. "Goodbye, dear old fellow," said Eustace at last, with a mighty effort. Guy clasped his hand without a word, his heart being too full to speak. "And you also, Alison." She gave him her hand also, and there they stood, husband and wife, with their hands clasped in those of the man, whom they both knew had fought a good fight and conquered. "Goodbye, Eustace," whispered the woman at last, with a look of infinite gratitude and pity in her deep eyes. "May God keep you, brother." And under the spell of that gentle benediction, he passed away from their sight forever. Chapter 40, A Letter from Home. I thought that our old life was over and done with. And ever apart, we would wander alone. That Clotho had broken the distaff she spun with. weaving the weird web that made my life one with your own. Yea, but this letter unbidden appeareth, a sorrowful ghost of the sweetness of yore, bringing dear thoughts which the lonely heart cheereth, recalling the words which the heavy soul heareth. No more. Ah, but love's blossom can ne'er bloom again, love. Withered and brown it lies dead in my heart. There let it faded and broken remain, love. We must live ever while years wax and wane, love. Apart. At the entrance to a tent, a man sat silent, watching the setting sun. A wild scene, truly, far beyond the bounds of civilization, where the foot of the white man had never trodden before, where the savage tribes had lived since the first of time in primeval simplicity, where nature, with lavish hand, spread her uncultured luxuriance in forest, in mountain, and in plain under a burning, tropical sky. It was a scene far in the interior of Africa, that mysterious continent, which has yet to yield up her secrets to the dogged curiosity of European races. The man was reading a letter that had come through swamp, through jungle, over mountains, across plains, by the hands of savage carriers, the last letter he would receive before plunging still deeper into the unknown lands beyond, the last link that bound him to civilization, a letter from home. Inside the tent, another man was also reading letters, from friends and club companions, which gave him all the latest gossip of that London, now so far away, but he read them lightly, and tossed them aside with a careless hand. The man outside, however, had only one letter, and as he read it, his eyes grew moist, blinding him so much that he could not see the writing, and looking up, gazed at the scene before him through a blurred mist of tears. Undulating grass plains, a wide river winding through the country like a silver serpent, clumps of tropical trees, and a distant vision of fantastic peaks, all flushed with splendid colors under the fierce light of the sunset. And the sky like a delicate shell of pale pink, fading off in the east to cold blue and somber shadows, in the west deepening into vivid billowy masses of golden clouds, which tried unsuccessfully to veil the intolerable splendor of the sinking sun. A breath of odorous wind under the burning sky, the chattering of monkeys, the shrieking of brilliant-colored parrots, and the low, guttural song of a naked Negro cleaning his weapons in the near camp. The man looked at all this with vague, unseeing eyes, for his thoughts were far away. Then, dashing away the tears, he once more began to read the letter he held in his hand. My dear Eustace, I can hardly believe that it is 9 months since you left us. I wonder in what part of Africa you will read this letter, that is, if it ever reaches you, of which I have considerable doubt. The papers, of course, informed us of your many months of delay at Zanzibar before you could go forward, so perhaps this letter may reach you before you get beyond the confines of civilization. I was very much astonished to hear you were at Zanzibar, as I thought you left England with the intention of going up the Nile and getting into the inland country that way. However, I suppose you had good reason for changing your plans and are now pushing forward into unknown lands. I have a great deal to tell you about ourselves and friends, which I am sure you will be pleased to hear. In the first place, both my wife and myself are completely happy. All the clouds of our earlier life have vanished, and I think that no married pair can have such perfect confidence and love for one another. I ascribe this happy state of things to you, dear old fellow, for had you not made Mrs. Veilstrom leave San Remo and brought my wife to my sick bed, we could never have come together again. I know, good friend that you are, you will be pleased to hear we are so perfectly happy, and that every year, every day, every hour, my wife grows dearer to me. As I write these words, her dear face is bending over my shoulder to read what I have set down, and she cordially endorses what I have said. Thanks to your kind gift of Aunt Jelly's money, all things pecuniarily are well with me. I have paid off the mortgages on the hall, and invested the rest of the money. So what with the income arising from such investments, and my rents, now regularly coming to me instead of to the lawyers, I am quite a rich man, and the Erringtons can once more hold up their head in the county as a representative family. By the way, I have some news to give you about our mutual friend, Mrs. Veilstrom, with whom I was so infatuated. She went on to New York, followed by Dolly Thambits, and has now married him. He is a young idiot to be sure, but then he has an excellent income, and that is all she cares about. Will not she spend his thousands for him? Well, I think you and I agree on that subject. Regarding Major Griff, she evidently found him less useful after than before she became Mrs. Thambits, so she has pensionied him off with a few thousands, and I hear the Major has gone to Central America, with a view to entering the service of one of the republics of those regions. His future fate is not hard to prophesy, as he will either become president or be shot, but in either event, I do not think he will trouble our fair friend again, who has retired so peacefully into married life. Next year, I believe, she is coming to town, and is going to cut a great dash. So no doubt Mrs. Thambits will be even more popular than Mrs. Veilstermouth, though, I dare say, there will not be any Sunday evenings of the Monte Carlo style. You will perhaps wonder at my writing so coolly about this lady, but the fact is, I now see only too clearly the danger I escaped. She would have ruined my life, and certainly made a good attempt to do so, only you fortunately intervened in time. What magic you used to force her to leave me alone I do not know, but I certainly have to thank you for extricating me from a very perilous position. Another item of news. Mrs. Maxian has presented the delighted Otterburn with a son and heir. By the way, I should not call him Otterburn, as by the death of his father 4 months ago he is now Lord Dunkeld. But old habits are hard to get rid of, and I always talk of them as Mrs. Maxian and Otterburn. They are very happy as they deserve to be, for Dunkeld is a real good fellow, and Lady Dunkeldwell, she is all that is charming. Do you remember Miss Minnie Pelch, poor Aunt Jelly's companion? She is now down at Errington with us, as she was so lonely in town that Elizon took pity on her, and she is installed as companion at the hall. Her volume of verse came out in due splendor, and was entirely overlooked by the press, at which I am not sorry, as if the poems had been noticed well, you know the poems of old. Minnie, however, thinks this silence is jealousy, and quite looks upon herself as a shining light of the Victorian age, so neither Elizon nor I undeceive her, for she is a good little woman, though somewhat of a bore with her infernally mean eternal poetry. I really do not think there is any more news to tell you, except that good old Mrs. Troubles is dead apoplexy and her dear Harry is now on the lookout for another spouse, with political influence. I wish it was poetical influence, and we might manage to marry him to Miss Pelch. Mr. Dalser and the pepper box have both gone under, never to rise again I hope. Some dreadful libel on a high personage appeared, at which the HP took umbrage, and the editor is now expiating his offense in prison. I cannot say I am very sorry, as when he is released Mr. Dalser will no doubt leave other people's affairs alone. Such men as he are the curse of the present age, and should all be sunk in the Atlantic for at least half an hour after, that I think we would have no more trouble with them. And now, my dear cousin, I must close this long letter. But first, in confidence, let me hint to you that my wife is expecting an interesting event to take place shortly, which will once more render the nursery a necessity. Poor Elizon has borne up bravely since the death of Sammy, but I know she longs for a child of her own to fill the vacant place in her heart. I am no longer afraid of having a rival in my child, as my wife loves and trusts me now, and my lot is as perfectly happy a one as any mortal can hope for. So now goodbye, my dear Eustace. I hope we will soon see you back again at the hall, where there is always a place for you. My wife sends her kindest regards to you, and so do I, thus closing this letter and remaining your affectionate cousin, Guy Errington. When Eustace finished reading the letter, he let it fall on the ground, and laughed bitterly. Kindest regards, he said sadly, and I gave her love. The sun was sinking swiftly behind the dark hills, and Gartney, with his hand supporting his chin, sat watching it, thinking of the days that were no more. So sad, so melancholy he felt, as he thought of the past, of the woman he loved so fondly, whom he had restored to the arms of her husband at the cost of his own happiness. Surely, if he had been selfish, vain, and egotistical all his life, he had expiated these sins by his voluntary sacrifice of self, a sacrifice that had banished all delight from his heart. And he sat there a lonely exile, with sorrow behind him, and danger before him, while the sun sank in the burning west, and the sable wings of night spread over the earth like a somber pall. There was darkness on the world, there was darkness in his heart, and from the midst of the shadows still sounded the melancholy chaunt of the slave. Extract from the Morning Planet. By a telegram from Zanzibar, there now seems no doubt that the two young Englishmen, who went into the interior of Africa some months ago, have been massacred. Only one survivor of the expedition escaped and managed to get safely to the coast. According to his story, Mr. Laxton was speared first by hostile natives from an ambush. Afterwards, Mr. Gartney met with the same fate, although he defended himself for some time with his revolver. Much regret will be felt in England at this sad news, as the two deceased gentlemen were both very popular, Mr. Gartney especially being widely known as a charming poet and essayist. He was very wealthy, and we hear that all his property, by a will executed before he left England, has been left to Lady Errington of Errington Hall, Dreamshire. So that was the end of Eustace Gartney.